The LG C2 OLED Evo TV is all new for 2022 with a brand new Evo panel, a new design, and even thinner bezels. But the question is, how does it compare to the best performing TV of 2021, the Sony A90J? Well, in this video we're going to find out. Stick around. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech, and I'm in the middle of testing and comparing the LG C2 OLED TV like I'll be doing for a bunch of the 2022 model TVs. So far I've compared it to the C1 from 2021, and I'll be comparing it also to the G1 from last year as well. But in this video we're comparing it to the Sony A90J, which is the best performing TV of 2021 as far as picture quality is concerned. The C2 definitely has its advantages when compared to the A90J, like its gaming prowess, but in this video we'll be comparing near black detail, HDR tone mapping, motion handling, as well as HDR10 and Dolby Vision video, viewing angles, you name it. So here we go. We'll start the comparison with a test of low stimulus using a brightness pattern which consists of 4% and lower gray slides. The pattern is very well represented on the A90J, but some key details are lost when viewed on the C2. This is evidence of some black crush still happening on low stimulus content when viewed on an LG OLED. The same is still true for this other low stimulus pattern in the bias lighting test, where there should be some diagonal lines that appear on both TVs, but we can see again that that detail is lost when viewed on the C2. When we compare how both TVs represent a low dynamic range image, we see again that a lot of the detail is lost when viewed on the C2, which appears on the A90J. The winner here is the Sony A90J. Next, we'll compare the tone mapping capabilities of the TVs, and to do this, the output of the test disc is set to 10,000 nits. So each TV will have to tone map the details beyond the brightness which the panels support natively. And in this case, the C2 has the better representation of the brightness of each section, as the definition between each section is very apparent. The A90J doesn't do quite as well, as there is no visible distinction between the two brightest sections. It does perform better in the two darkest sections though. In the tunnel test we see more of the same, where the A90J does better in the darker sections while the C2 does better in the brighter sections. The winner here is the LG C2. Next is the test of banding to see how well each TV can reproduce a smooth gradient using an 8-bit and 10-bit source. And both TVs have some trouble creating a smooth gradient on the 8-bit source, where there is some posterization visible in the gradient. The transition between colors just isn't that smooth. However, the 8-bit source does look better on the Sony than it does on the LG, and the 10-bit source on the Sony is a smooth representation, while there is some banding evident in the 10-bit source on the chroma red pattern on the LG C2. The winner here is the A90J. Because of the instant pixel response of OLED TVs, objects panning across the screen can exhibit judder, and the A90J and C2 are no exceptions. On the stock ticker test, there is noticeable judder as the objects move from the left to the right of the screen, but enabling motion enhancement on either TV resolves these issues. However, there is some noticeable artifacting that occurs on the edges of moving objects, but the C2 creates more of these artifacts than you'd see on the A90J. If we move on to the simpler running peppers test, then neither TV creates artifacting on the edge of the peppers as they pan across the screen with motion enhancement enabled. The winner here though is the Sony A90J. Now let's move on to the HDR video comparison using a Dolby Vision source. But first, some caveats. Both TVs are in their most accurate picture preset, the cinema mode, and there is a slight difference in color temperature, which is evident when comparing the pictures on both TVs. Also, there's a slight moire effect which is evident on the A90J, which does not appear in person but is an artifact introduced from recording the screen. Speaking of which, each screen was recorded separately using the exact same camera settings. Although both TVs use LG's new Evo panel and the C2 is noticeably brighter than 2021's C1, the A90J is still the brighter TV here. That's the first thing you notice when these two TVs are compared side by side, and the increased perceived contrast on the Sony makes the image pop that much more than it does on the C2. Not only the overall brightness of the A90J when compared to the LG C2, but the specular highlights on the A90J here is another standout feature. The brighter elements on the Sony just has that better HDR pop, which is what you're looking for and is definitely a testament to Sony's picture processing. Now, even though both TVs have the OLED Evo panel, the Sony takes it one step further by integrating a heatsink on the A90J, which helps it to achieve higher overall brightness than the C2 can achieve, and for a longer duration that TVs without a heatsink can maintain, like the C2 here. The better specular highlight performance of the A90J is even more evident on darker scenes where it just adds more dimension to the image. This comparison shows the advantage and disadvantage of Sony's and LG's approach to HDR on their OLED TVs, as first evident in the HDR test patterns. And what I mean by that is the LG appears to tone map all the brightness details to a level which the C2 can display natively. The LG though appears to do it in a more linear way, so there's no super bright portion to the image, while on the Sony though it does also tone map, the specular highlights are significantly brighter than other elements on screen. This difference is more than just a difference in brightness between panels, but a difference in HDR implementation. As a result, the image on the Sony seems multi-dimensional and realistic, while on the LG in comparison, it just feels flat. In isolation though, the HDR image both TVs produce is outstanding. Interestingly enough, the difference in specular highlights between both TVs isn't as pronounced on HDR10 sources. Though the image on the A90J remains brighter, the specular highlights on HDR10 sources don't appear quite as flat on the C2 and are more in line with what you'd expect, so the image has that HDR pop that you'd come to expect. Colors appear saturated and the contrast punchy, so it's a great image on both TVs. The winner here again is the Sony A90J. Now to compare the viewing angles of both TVs, and there is some brightness and contrast loss when we view both TVs off axis. There is an ever so slight magenta hue to the image on the C2 which does not appear on the A90J. This is not always apparent but appears sometimes on white elements. This may also be panel specific, but the winner in this case by the smallest of margins is the A90J. So one of the biggest takeaways from this comparison is how much worse the C2 handles near black detail when compared to the A90J. There is a good deal of black crush which happens in those instances, as we saw with the tests. The disparity in the Dolby Vision HDR performance was also really interesting because it seemed like the C2 kind of overly tone mapped the image, which resulted in a pretty flat HDR performance, while the A90J was it had some very bright scenes, so it tone mapped the details a lot better than the LG did, and as a result the HDR image just popped that much more. Not only that, but the A90J was consistently brighter thanks to its implemented heatsink on the TV, which then helps the TV to maintain a higher peak brightness for a longer time than you'd find on LG C2 implementation. And because of that, the C2 is more susceptible to ABL, auto brightness limiter. Let's look at this example. Did you see that? Here it is again. And here's another example. The change isn't really perceptible in regular viewing, but is very evident when we slow the recording down to 25%. The G2 OLED from LG will have a heatsink built in, so I'm curious to see how these TVs compare in that instance. I'll be doing that comparison as well, so if you're interested, you should definitely subscribe. That said, I really like the picture performance of the A90J, and even though it's a 2021 model TV, and as of making this video, the LG C2 has been on the market for, say, 3 weeks, the A90J is still more expensive than the C2, about $400 or $500 more expensive at the time of filming this video. But I can see why, because the performance is that much better. Even though if you're primarily a gamer, then the C2 would definitely be the better option for you. But if you're watching mostly movies, I think the A90J would better suit you. Not only is it the picture quality, but the sound quality that is better on the A90J as well, because that TV has Sony's acoustic surface technology, which vibrates the screen to create the sound. So the sound appears to be coming directly from the objects producing the sound on screen. And you can use the TV as a center channel if you have a surround sound system, which is really cool. Of course, that brings up an issue of timbre matching with your other speakers, but at least you have the option in case you want to go that direction, right? That said, if I had to buy one of these two TVs right now, I would choose the A90J because the performance is that much better. Not only in movies, as we've seen, but in games as well. The HDR performance just makes the image pop that much more on the Sony, which is just not the case on the C2. Granted, the image still pops on the C2, but the A90J is just that much better. Well, let me know what you guys think in the comments and which one of these two TVs you prefer. The LG just has hands down the better gaming features, like support for G-Sync, FreeSync, as well as VRR, things that the A90J are promised to have. But you know what I say, never buy current technology in anticipation of future fixes, because they might not come. But as I said, I'll be doing a lot of comparisons this year, and I'll be comparing the C2 to the G2 as well to see what you get for that extra money from LG, and I'll also be comparing the G2 to the A90J and the QLEDs out there and the QD-OLEDs. There's a lot of comparisons to come because I have to make up for the comparisons I didn't do last year. My bad. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villa Man saying be safe and peace.